Good evening, curious minds of the interwebs. I'm Alexa, the resident ooky spooky girly, and today we're diving into some of the craziest stuff I've ever found out about, possibly ever in this lifetime. Honest to goodness, I had to triple research some of this because it was just so wild. Question for y'all, what's your favorite conspiracy theory? The silliest one I enjoy is that Avril Lavigne was replaced by a clone named Melissa. It's just so ridiculous. On that note, welcome to the top 5 dark conspiracy theories that were actually true. Number 5, Project Sunshine. There was nothing 1950s and 60s America loved more than dropping big nuclear devices and watching them go kaboom. From a plan to nuke Alaska, which could still happen, to actually nuking space, America wasn't shy about seeing some scenery and thinking, I'll put a mushroom cloud there. But in these early days of nuclear weaponry, we still didn't really know the effects these nuclear tests had on the human body. We had estimates on how much radioactive strontium produced by tests would kill a person, but the exact effects of fallout on humans and human tissue were basically unknown and unstudied. And what we did know about levels of strontium-90 worried scientists at the time, and yet, the world continued to test weapons. Project Sunshine was a series of research studies that began in 1953 to figure out the impact of radioactive fallout on the world's population. The project was initially kept secret and only became known publicly in 1956. Commissioned jointly by the United States Atomic Energy Commission and USAF Project RAND, Sunshine sought to examine the long-term effects of nuclear radiation on the biosphere due to repeated nuclear detonations of increasing yields. With the conclusion from Project Gabriel that radioactive isotope SR90 represented the most serious threat to human health from nuclear fallout, Project Sunshine sought to measure the global dispersion of SR90 by measuring its concentration in the tissues and bones of the dead. Of particular interest was tissue from the young, whose developing bones had the highest propensity to accumulate SR90 and thus the highest susceptibility to radiation damage. It was in this environment that scientists at the Sunshine Conference, ergo the influence on the name, a conference that looked at the long-term effect of atomic weapons, argued in favor of sampling strontium fallout in humans to determine whether potentially damaging levels of it were present in different populations. In 1955, there was a meeting of the Atomic Energy Commission, which came up with some of the specifics of the testing and urged researchers to use their own contacts to discreetly get a hold of tissue and bone samples without disclosing the nature of the research being concluded, nor getting permission of the deceased. Dr. Willard Libby said in the transcription of that meeting, which was only released to the public in 1995, that it is a matter of prime importance to get them, and particularly in the young age group. So human samples are of prime importance, and if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will be really serving their country. Sunshine recruited a worldwide network of agents to find recently deceased little ones and then take samples and even limbs that were collected without notification or permission. Around 6,000 corpses from 26 bone collection sites around the world were shipped under top secret conditions to the project headquarters in Chicago and to a satellite research office at Columbia University in New York. In one particularly grim example, a stillborn's legs were removed by researchers in the UK, and the mother was told that she couldn't dress the stillborn for the funeral, to conceal from her that the legs had been taken for the project. I can't believe I just found out about this for the first time today. Number 4, Project MKUltra. This is easily the most well-known theory on today's list. I remember hearing jokes about it while I was growing up without really knowing exactly what anyone was talking about. So this was a CIA program called MKUltra, which had the stated goal of developing biological and chemical weapon capability during the Cold War. Secretly dosing individuals with LSD in order to test the potential effects of mind control. According to Stephen Kinzer, the CIA project was a continuation of the work begun in World War II era Japanese facilities and Yahtzee concentration camps on subduing and controlling human minds. He wrote that MKUltra's use of mescaline on unwitting subjects was a practice that Yahtzee doctors had begun in the camps at Auschwitz and Dachau, and provided evidence of the continuation of a Yahtzee agenda, citing the CIA's secret recruitment of Yahtzee punishers and vivisectionists to continue experimenting on thousands of subjects. And Yahtzees were brought to Fort Detrick, Maryland, to instruct CIA officers on the lethal uses of sarin gas. Yeah, not shocked that this originated with the German bad guys. The project was headed by Sidney Gottlieb, but began on order of CIA Director Alan Dulles on April 13th of 1953. The project began during a period of what English journalist Rupert Cornwell described as paranoia at the CIA, when the US had lost its nuclear monopoly and fear of communism was at its height. Although the practice reportedly continued for 2 decades, it was launched before the drug movement of the 1960s made LSD into a popular counterculture symbol, and more mind control techniques were discovered. discovered. During the program, the CIA established front companies to work with more than 80 institutions, such as hospitals, prisons, and universities. In some cases, academic researchers were funded through grants from CIA front organizations, but were unaware that the CIA was using their work for these purposes. With these partnerships in place, the agency then ran experiments on subjects using hypnosis, and verbal and physical torment. Many of the human guinea pigs were mental patients, prisoners, addicts, and body-selling workers, or one agency put it, people who could not fight back. In areas under American control in the early 1950s in Europe and East Asia, mostly Japan, West Germany, and the Philippines, the CIA created secret detention centers so that the US could avoid criminal prosecution. The CIA captured people suspected of being enemy agents and other people it deemed expendable to undertake various types of punishment and human experimentation on them. The prisoners were interrogated while being administered psychoactive drugs, electroshocked, and subjected to extremes of temperature, sensory isolation, and more to develop a better understanding of how to destroy and control human minds. In one case, a mental patient in Kentucky was dosed with LSD continuously for 174 days. So invested in LSD was the CIA that some have labeled the agency responsible for the entire psychedelic movement in the United States. At least 2 American deaths can be attributed to this program, according to the Church Committee. And though that committee uncovered much of this shocking program, many of the top secret files were ordered to be destroyed in 1973 by CIA Director Richard Helms after the Watergate scandal. But enough remains to confirm one of the wildest, least ethical, most unbelievable stories from the history books. And while being given some free acid might sound like a great time to some folks, or at least the plot to a bad movie, dozens of people were left with permanent disabilities after secretly being subjected to this. Goodness gracious. Number 3, Bohemian Grove. A secret organization of people that control the world? Well, you know what, it turns out it actually does exist, and many of its members are powerful world leaders and titans of industries. The real action happens at Bohemian Grove, which appears to primarily exist as a place where the rich and powerful go to misbehave, according to the Washington Post. Bohemian Grove is a restricted 2,700-acre campground at 20601 Bohemian Avenue in Monte Rio, California, United States, belonging to a private San Francisco-based gentlemen's club known as, you guessed it, Bohemian Club. In mid-July of each year, Bohemian Grove hosts a more than 2-week encampment of some of the most prominent men in the world. The Bohemian Club's all-male membership includes artists and musicians, as well as many prominent business leaders, government officials, former US presidents, senior media executives, and people of power. Members may invite guests for either the Spring Jinx in June or main July encampments, schedule private day-use events when, it's not being used for club-wide purposes, and they are allowed at these times to bring spouses, family, and friends, although female and minor guests must be off the property by 9 or 10 o'clock at night. After 40 years of membership, the men earn Old Guard status, giving them reserved seating at the Grove's daily talks, as well as other perks. Former US President Herbert Hoover was inducted into the Old Guard on March 4th of 1953 because he had joined the club exactly 40 years prior. The club motto is, "Weaving spiders come not here," which implies that outside concerns and business deals are to be left outside, although discussion of business often occurs between pairs of members. Important political and business deals have been developed at the Grove, notably a Manhattan Project planning meeting that took place there in September of 1942, subsequently leading to the atomic explosive device. Those attending this meeting included Ernest Lawrence, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the S1 executive committee heads such as the presidents of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, along with representatives of Standard Oil and General Electric, as well as various military officials. At the time, Oppenheimer was not an S1 member, although Lawrence and Oppenheimer hosted the meeting. Grove members take particular pride in this event and often relate the story to new attendees. Other behavior at the campground has led to numerous claims, with President Richard Nixon's comments from May 13th of 1971, calling it the most, insert F-word slur for gay here, goddamn thing you could ever imagine. I swear finding a way to say curse words without getting dinged by YouTube rules is like writing a crossword puzzle. Oh, to be a fly on the wall on any one of those meetings though. Number 2, poisoning booze during Prohibition. If you wake up with a hangover in today's day and age, you might be tempted to curse everything under the sun, to the tune of, "Who did this to me?" And while the only correct answer is yourself, in the past you actually could have blamed the government. For over a decade, the United States barred the production and sale of drinking alcohol in what became known as the Prohibition era. An abstinence movement had existed in the United States since at least the 1830s, culminating in the adjustment of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution in January of 1920 to make drinking legal again. At the time, manufacturers of industrial alcohol had been mixing their product with dangerous chemicals for years prior to Prohibition. But between 1926 to 1933, the federal government pushed manufacturers to use stronger poisons to discourage bootleggers from turning the alcohol into moonshine. Officials reasoned that by mandating toxic additives into products which would be converted to bootleg alcohol, the supply could effectively be, cut before consumption. Oftentimes folks were drinking industrial methanol, otherwise known as wood alcohol, which was a legal but extremely dangerous poison. The federal government had required companies to denature industrial alcohol to make it undrinkable as early as 1906. But during Prohibition, it ordered them to add quinine, methyl alcohol, and other toxic chemicals as a further deterrent. While increasing pressure from sellers and illegal importation of alcohol somewhat limited the supply of beverages, demand remained strong, with speakeasies and smuggling networks arising as quickly as they were squashed. Think of it like a really wild game of whack-a-mole. New York's 21 Club, a speakeasy, had an elaborate system of levers to hide the bar shelves and tip incriminating liquor bottles into the sewer in case of a raid. High demand for alcohol, accompanied by an unregulated black market, meant that sales of now toxic bootleg liquors continued despite the additional poison. By the end of the decade, though, officials in the federal government adapted their strategies for enforcing Prohibition. In 1929, enforcement of Prohibition transferred from the Internal Revenue Service to the Justice Department, which then launched massive crackdowns on organized crime in cities like Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. It wasn't until the repeal of the 18th Amendment in 1933, which I already mentioned, that the federal government reversed course on its temperance policies. By the end of Prohibition, more than 10,000 Americans had been killed by tainted booze, though. Number 1. Canadian Gaydar. So while Canada as a country legalized gay marriage a whole decade before the United States, we haven't always been the most progressive about it. In the 1960s, Canada was actually so paranoid that the government developed what they called a fruit machine, and today was when I learned the origin of the derogatory use of the word. I knew of its use in queer contexts before, but never like the origin. It was developed by a psychology professor with Carleton University, and the subjects were made to view sexy gay videos. The device then measured the diameter of the pupils of the eyes, perspiration, and pulse for a supposed erotic response. The machine was employed in the 1950s and 60s during a campaign to eliminate all gay men from the civil service, the RCMP, and the military. Thanks to the nonsense, a substantial number of workers did lose their jobs, believed to be in the 400-person range. Although funding for the project was cut off in the late 1960s, the investigations continued, and the RCMP collected files on 9,000 people who had been investigated. So the machine used a chair similar to that used by dentists. It had a pulley with a camera going towards the pupils, with a black box located in front of it that displayed pictures, ranging from, the mundane to sexually explicit photos of men and women. It had previously been determined that the pupils would dilate in relation to the amount of interest in the picture, in a technique termed the pupillary response test. Current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offered an apology and compensation to those affected back in 2021, something I think was long overdue. And that brings us to the end of our time, and my head is still spinning. I also feel more justified in my stance of overly criticizing the government for getting away with covering up so much. If you enjoyed the wild nature of today's video, could you help us out by giving this a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more conspiracies from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.